Okay, quick game breakdown video. Let's go. I played e4. My opponent played c5. This is called the Sicilian defense. I played knight to c3. This is the closed Sicilian. We both develop our bishops this way. This is called to fianchetto your bishop. It's an Italian word and it puts your bishop on a more longer and central diagonal. I develop my knight this way in order not to block this bishop. And here I just played h3, which is a waiting move. I don't want to commit my king to castling just yet, as my opponent may storm forward with his pawns. So I just play this waiting move, which the idea is it just keeps a piece out of g4. I may want to play f4 later, so it's nice just to stop a piece from coming to g4. My opponent then plays rook to b8. He just wants to get a bishop out of the scope of this rook, and he intends to expand on the queen side with b5, b4. Now he's moved his rook, I can commit to castling. My opponent does the same. I now play a4, stopping b5. I'm expecting my opponent to play a6 and push it through anyway. That's what they usually do. But he plays knight to d4 instead. I just develop my bishop to e3. I'm now threatening to win a pawn here with takes, takes, takes. So my opponent backs up his knight again with e5. But this has now weakened the d5 square. A weak square is when there's no pawns that can control that square. I now played king to h2. The idea is I want to develop my queen and connect these rooks, but you can't do that right now, as that would blunder this pawn because you can't take it back. Forky forky, you lose your queen. So I play king to h2 just to secure this pawn, and my opponent plays knight to h5. He wants to break with f5, but now my opponent has vacated the defense of this d5 square. I hop my knight in. Knights are the best pieces to occupy weak squares, especially in the center here. Look at all the influence this knight has. This is called a central outpost. My opponent plays f5 and I take with the e-pawn, just opening this bishop and strengthening my grip on this weak square. My opponent recaptures with the knight. Now I don't want my opponent to take this bishop because my opponent has weak dark squares around his king, so I'd quite like to keep this bishop. So I drop it back, and my opponent plays knight to f6. Now I move the bishop again, which looks silly, but it's pinning this knight, and I want to induce him to play h6. If he plays h6, that weakens his king even further. He does play h6, and now instead of moving the bishop and losing the tempo again, I make the trade. But this is also a good trade because this bishop cannot influence this d5 square as it's the wrong colour, whereas this knight can influence the d5 square. So after the trades, I'm left with 3 pieces that can occupy this square, and my opponent only has 1, 2. So my grip on this weak central square is strengthened, and it's a big resource for me. So I play knight to c3, again strengthening my grip on here and looking to jump in here. My opponent plays b6, he wants to develop his bishop this way. I develop my queen, connect my rooks, and I'm keeping an eye on this pawn if this knight ever moves. My opponent defends that pawn with king to g7. I now play knight to e4. This is another strong central square. There's no pawns to kick this knight. And I mean, just look at all the squares these knights control on the board. It's crazy. So they're really strong pair of central knights here. My opponent then blunders with bishop to b7. The problem is I have 2 attackers on this bishop, and my opponent can only recapture with a rook or a queen, so I'm going to win material. But my opponent takes with the bishop in the middle, not realising that I can just jump backwards and recapture. It's a common blunder you see a lot, and my opponent resigns the game as he's now a piece down. If you want more in-depth analysis, you can go on my YouTube channel, and if you really like this video, then let me know. I'll keep making more of them. Thanks for watching.